Welcome to the Generative Edge, the podcast that brings you the latest news and events in the world of generative AI. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a consultant at Deloitte Central Europe.
I'm Brandon, and I'm the natural language processing and generative AI practice lead at Deloitte Central Europe.
And there are a few tasks where generative AI really shines. So these are the tasks that we tend to use in our daily lives to make everything more productive, smoother. However, like any tool, it can be overused. And so that's something that we're going to talk about today is how can we make our lives more productive using generative AI on a daily basis? But what are the things to watch out for to make sure that we don't fall into the common traps and pitfalls, should we say?
Perfect.
Yeah. So first things first, I have to say, I definitely use generative AI in my daily life. I am maybe not constantly, but using it quite often because it saves me time and it helps me stop getting, what is that called? The blank page syndrome, right? When you're staring at a blank page and it just is scary and you can't think of anything. Writer's block?
Writer's block, yeah.
So with that, there are a couple of things that generative AI is just truly, really, really good at. So let's start there, Brandon.
Okay.
So what would you say are, I don't know, like the three things that generative AI is just badass at?
I don't know if I would say that it's perfect at these tasks, but it's what most people are using it for. So the first one that comes to mind is content creation. People who are writing LinkedIn posts or Facebook posts, Christmas cards, poetry, song lyrics, trying to come up with ideas for presentations, those sorts of things. So they're really using it for like creation of content or some kind of like outline so that they can fill it in themselves. Another one would be like summarization. So a lot of people, they have to do a lot of reading for their work, or maybe it's not even work related. It could just be like that they don't want to read an entire news article or something. And a lot of people will say, whatever, summarize this news article so that I don't have to read the entire thing. Just give me the bullet points. And generative models are typically, at this point, pretty good at that. That's one of the tried and true tasks.
Yeah.
And the other one is question answering. So people are asking questions of large language models in the same way that they would ask questions of Google, for example, just in slightly more natural ways. So instead of like looking up the best page using just like keywords, they will literally type out a question and expect a large language model to give them an answer. And I think it's also important here to make the distinction between like asking a model and asking a service.
Okay.
Right. So
what would be the differences then?
Yeah. So like OpenAI, for example, most people are interacting with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not just a model. It's a model and a web tool, and it's connected to the internet, and it's connected to supporting software like search engines, classification models, content filtering, all this other stuff. So it's like a model surrounded by a lot of other software.
Right.
And that whole thing forms a product. So when people are asking questions of ChatGPT, they're asking a product, which is a list of different services all orchestrated together to give them an answer. If you deploy like a large language model like Llama or something locally on your own computer or on your own device and it's not connected to the internet, it doesn't have access to all that information. So people asking questions of those models without any of the supporting software will get different answers than something that has been connected to other external sources of information.
Okay, so it's basically like you're giving it like more muscle, if you will, like basically, to be able to do other things.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, I guess I'm already getting into the pitfalls a little bit. But
well, I was going to say, don't worry, we will get there. But before we turn to the pitfalls, because it is important to talk about those, let's talk about the things that, you know, the tasks that generative AI is really good at and that can help our daily lives. So like I said, I certainly have some personal experience with these areas because I'm busy.
Surprise.
So let's talk a little bit about content creation. So you did mention that it helps, writing content. So you mentioned LinkedIn posts, social media, emails, some business frameworks.
Yeah.
So I can just say personally that I have absolutely used it for that. Actually, if any of you are already following us on LinkedIn, you've probably seen that I've used that because there's a little call to action with the rocket ship and maybe perhaps the content says, let's delve into something. I feel like those are dead giveaways that ChatGPT wrote that.
If it has a rocket emoji in it, it came from GPT, period.
Yeah. Which, again, like I said, I use this myself.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm saying that it's bad or good or something. It is just helpful. It's a tool.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've noticed when I'm writing content or asking GPT or whatever, ChatGPT, all the different apps that we use for it, when I'm asking it to help me with that, I absolutely still have to double check things, make sure that it doesn't sound exactly like ChatGPT wrote it, and to make sure that I'm infusing my own voice and style into the content. Because what I've noticed is that, like you've said before, that the output based on, hey, help me write a LinkedIn post or help me write this proposal is going to generate similar responses. Maybe not the exact same response, but similar responses every time. Why is that?
Yeah, so large language models treat language as a probability distribution, which I don't know if you have any basic background in statistics. You've probably studied
Not
the bell
much,
curve.
to be honest.
Okay, that's okay. So I mean, so you need to know what a normal distribution is. Basically, that things that are really low or really high on that distribution. So let's say that you're just rolling a dice, right? Most of the time, you're going to get a 7 because there's a lot of combinations of 2 dice that create a 7. You have a 3 and a 4, or a 2 and a 5, or 1 and a 6, etc. And the other numbers that you can get are lower distribution. So it's really difficult to roll 2. If you have 2 dice and you roll, you have to get a 1 on each one of them, and there's only that one combination that will give it to you. So in the middle, you have lots and lots of combinations for 7, very few that'll give you 2 or 12 if you add up 2 dice, right?
Okay.
Same idea here. Large language models treat language like a distribution where some words are really, really unlikely to be used, and a lot of words in the middle are the ones that are most probably going to be used.
Okay.
And a language model, or even a foundation model that works with language and text, and audio and images or whatever, it treats everything as this distribution. So based on whatever you give it, it's going to predict whatever the most likely next word is. And because everybody's using the same model, which are modeling on the same training data, then probabilistically you're going to see the same words, you're going to see the same grammar, and it's more difficult to sort of get it to predict words that are on the lower end of that probability distribution. So more creativity is difficult to do without introducing a lot of randomness into the system. But if you introduce a lot of randomness, then you might introduce a lot of errors. So it's in the best interest of the people making these models that they look like real human language, but it also makes everybody converge on the same type of outputs. Yeah.
I was going to say, it feels like, not that I should be admitting to this on a podcast, but when you would cheat off the same person in school, everyone has the same answer then. And
exactly.
So that's kind of, okay, we're not cheating exactly, but maybe a little bit. Okay, so that makes sense. So when we are using ChatGPT or any of these models, apps for content creation, it is just that, right? You're getting rid of the writer's block. Finally remembered the word. Getting rid of the writer's block. You're trying to just start the iteration process, right?
Exactly.
So again, infusing your own voice into things, making sure that it's factually accurate. All these things are still really important, even though generative AI is good at content creation or putting text together.
Exactly. The focus here, though, is that you're creating that content and then it's giving you ideas. It's sparking your imagination and your ability to come up with more creative content, not necessarily offloading all of the creative work to the large language model. So you'll definitely be able to tell the difference between somebody who makes LinkedIn posts or something or marketing material that has used ideas from GPT or just copy pasted, because it will look like this cookie cutter text, versus somebody who has very creative ideas and something that's thinking outside the box. Those aren't things that you would expect a large language model to be able to do, and trying to force it to do that is going to probably not end up with the results that you're expecting.
Now, I'm a little bit afraid to ask this question because I'm not a programmer, but I know that content creation under this umbrella. Coding could fit under that umbrella as well.
Point. Yeah.
So do the same things that we have to be wary of for text, content creation stuff, do we also have to be wary of that in programming as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many people do programming in their daily lives not related to work. I do sometimes. This weekend, I was literally programming a bot to plan all of my retirement savings.
This is what he does in his free time, y'all.
Right. But I don't think everybody does that kind of stuff. But yeah, in coding, you will definitely notice with junior developers who are relying too much on GPT that their code looks, I don't know if bland is the right word, but like cookie cutter. So and for some problems, it's like there's a very widely accepted way to fix certain problems, like sorting letters or searching through information or whatever. And what you'll notice is that people who rely too much on these like predictive models that fill in the text for them, the code starts to tend to look the same. It has the same types of problems, and usually overlooks the same level of detail. Okay. So usually when you're like developing code, you also need to be aware of everything else in your coding project, not just in the one file you're working with. And it's really difficult to get coding assistants to pay attention to all of the context rather than just the singular context you're working with in that single file. So and this was a concern that one of my colleagues brought up, if like maybe a whole year ago, was that, oh my gosh, now that we have these coding assistants, we're going to have so many people who are relying too much on them to generate code, and all the code's going to be bad and it's going to look the same.
Okay.
And I'm starting to see a little bit of that. I was like really optimistic. I was like, no, it's going to be fine. But it is really the case that if you use the tools too much, you start to lose your ability to creatively work, like problem solve. And you just rely on this like very easy, very quick sort of generative model fixing the problems for me. And we were talking earlier about learned helplessness.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds exactly like that. So can you just really quick, can you break down a little bit of what learned helplessness is? I know that's not technical expertise, but how would you define that?
It's like a good example is like sometimes in the home, in certain parts of American culture, like men are not expected to be able to wash dishes or do the laundry. And so because they never are expected to do these things, they just kind of like have other people doing it for them their whole lives. And then they learn not to ever learn how to do that. And they just rely on other people. So like you can get adult people who have no idea how to dust the shelves or do really basic tasks. And I kind of worry that the same thing is happening here. You have a lot of power in these models, and especially in the coding copilots. If you rely too much on it, then suddenly, as soon as you lose access to the internet and you have to do all the coding yourself, you've forgotten what the methods are, you've forgotten how to approach certain problems, you forgot the syntax, so I'm definitely seeing that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not a programmer, but I definitely use ChatGPT to help me write things. And I've noticed that sometimes it's harder for me to start something without having that jump start. So it's a little bit of that learned helplessness as well. I mean,
sure.
Luckily, I haven't gotten too far into it because I recognize what's happening and I'm like, no. But that's one of the pitfalls that can happen. So you have a tool, it makes your life easier. And so you start using it all the time and you forget those kind of basic skills, if you will.
But so, for some things it may not be a problem because like everybody uses calculators to calculate like the tangent and the sine and the cosine if you're in high school, and
or basic mathematics.
Or basic math,
forgetting it in the line,
just because it's really accurate, you may not necessarily need to know all of the underpinnings of something. I could go on and on about, but I'll stop there.
Well, that actually is a nice segue. So to summarize, so let's talk about summarization. Now, I certainly love this feature because, especially if there's like a meeting that is being recorded or there's a transcript, maybe I didn't make the whole meeting. I know this is part of like copilots that are being integrated into software, commonly used software in businesses. This is something that really is quite useful to me. If there's a transcript of a meeting, if there's a transcript of a video, and I just need a quick, hey, what was happening here? Yeah. Boom, put it into GPT, and all of a sudden I have a bullet point summary as in-depth or as high level as I'd like it to be.
Exactly.
Which is fantastic because time. It's hard to go to all the meetings and watch all the videos. Right. I know that I use summarization for, looking at PDFs, what's the targeted area that I should be looking at in this report that just came out. But can you talk a little bit about some of the other summarization use cases that we've worked on in the past?
So there's a summarization tool that we did for like a risk advisory group. So they read, their jobs were literally to like read news articles every day. They they write summaries of those news articles with a specific format. And I think this might be the point to focus on, is that they didn't just want a summary, because when I say summarize a document, it can mean 80 different things.
Right.
It can mean like summarize the people that were mentioned in it, or summarize it topically, or summarize it with respect to something else. And same thing is with, like research articles or books. Like, do you want a summary of the characters, a summary of the story, a summary of the structure? And so I think a lot of the summarization business use cases focus on not just can we summarize this, but how do we summarize it in the way that's specific to the use case?
We're talking about summarization, and obviously it's useful, right? That we can just know the high level points. Like you said, depending on the type of summary that we want, we can ask a targeted question to GPT and it'll give us the type of summary we want. I can imagine that there are certain situations where you ask for a summary, it spits out a summary, that summary gets sent off to a bunch of people, and then that summary still looks too long, and then that gets summarized. And so we have this kind of summarization of summarization of summarization. I mean, obviously that sounds like a pitfall. What are the actual pitfalls of that? Like, have you had experience with that?
Yeah, I would say I had more experience with this in academia, and not necessarily from like a generated model. But if you imagine like a paper that comes out and you're supposed to critically think about how the study was done. So my academic background is linguistics. We were studying, how people produce sounds and how their language is affected by their demographic, that kind of thing. And oftentimes as a student, you're trying to get through a lot of information very quickly, and so you'll just read the abstract, which is what happens at the top of the paper, right?
Guilty. Yeah.
And then there's this decision point where you say, okay, should I take some of the stuff that's from this abstract and cite this paper and use some whatever I've learned from the abstract, or do I actually read the paper and understand it and then cite it? And it's never a good idea just to read the abstract and then assume that you've understood the study, because something might say that people are 20% more productive when they use generative AI. Well, and credit to my old linguistics professor, Dr. Mary Shapiro, if you're listening, from Truman State University in Missouri. She always taught us to critically think about everything, critically analyze anything that somebody tells you or something that you read. And so I would question, what do you mean 20% more productivity? How do you measure productivity? Who were the people that you studied? What kind of generative AI were you using? What was the task that they were trying to do? Did you measure it in time or in the number of like words that they typed or something? So there's all these different questions that come into my mind just from one piece of information. And that's the kind of analytical thinking that you don't get to do if you just read summaries of information and you don't have access to the rest of it. So for some things it might not even matter. Like maybe you just need the bullet points and that's it, because those are all the things that matter. In other cases, maybe you're presenting on that information and it's really important that you know who was the test done on. Did it introduce bias into the results? Does it make my results less, trustworthy? And those are really important questions to ask, I think. Yeah.
I was going to say, this is definitely something that I've noticed in, since working at Deloitte. Like, we do cite our sources, or at least we try to, do our due diligence. And there's a lot of materials floating around that don't have those citations. So then when you actually try to track it down, you realize that it's this kind of loop of like a summary of a summary of a summary of a summary. And I can see how GPT is going to maybe exacerbate that problem, because it's kind of already a problem. So now it's going to be even more. But I think, again, right, it's a tool.
Yeah.
And so you just have to use the tool responsibly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, due diligence, you're going to hear me say that 1,000 times on this podcast, but it's important.
Yeah. And a lot of companies are starting to build in these like citation mechanisms. So if a large language model pulls information from a specific website, it'll list it. But it's not something that every company is worried about or implementing. So yeah, always do your due diligence, try to figure out where the information came from, and don't just assume that it's correct at face value.
Yeah. Now, I feel like these 2 points are tied a little bit, especially depending on the use case and how folks are using it. But the question answering aspect of generative AI.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
for example, like we were just talking about PDFs, getting a summary from them, but you theoretically could also upload a document, a PDF, into GPT and say, hey, tell me about this, or I have a question about this specific section. Can we talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah.
High level, because I know there's probably a lot of tech underlying that.
Yeah.
But what is the difference between like a summarization and a question and answer?
So question answering is just you literally just you ask a question and you expect an answer in return. There's 2 ways to do this. You can do this to the product directly. Let's say that it's a product supported by all that software that I was talking about earlier. Maybe it has access to Google, so it can do searches on the internet and get that information, and helps it to generate a response. If that's the case, there's no guarantee that the stuff that it pulls from the internet is going to be correct. So
shocking,
right? Yeah. So we actually measure 2 different things with large language models. One is the hallucination rate, and one is the faithfulness, which is basically what hallucination is, but for contexts where the large language model has provided additional information. So hallucination. Let's say that I'm just got a model and I don't have any of the supporting software, no connections to the internet whatsoever. Whatever information I ask for, it is basically predicting what the answer is based on whatever it saw in its training data.
Right.
And if it saw a particular answer to a question more times than not, then that's what it's going to predict. So like if I asked, is Santa real or not? I hope no kids are listening right now. Then the model will probably say something like, no, he's not real, but we pretend that he's real, blah, blah, blah. Because that's what it's seen in all of its training data and what people provide on the internet, right? But now let's say that you introduce a search system and you connect it with like a, I don't know, Santa conspiracy theory, Santa's actually real kind of website, and you're pulling this information. Okay, based on this context, give me an answer, is Santa real or not? And it's going to be like, yes, based on this material that I have immediate access to, Santa is real, despite what many people think in the news or something.
Very conspiratorial, yeah.
So hallucination is when the model is just giving you an answer based on information that it already has encoded on the data that it's already trained on, and it could be wrong. So we could consider that like a hallucinated response. A faithful response is, okay, here's the website, here's the information that I'm going to give you. Can you generate a response that matches the factuality of what I've provided? So let's say that it searches, it gets the Santa is real stuff, but it still says Santa is not real. That would be considered a non-faithful answer.
Okay.
Yeah, but not necessarily a hallucination.
Okay, that's interesting because I know we use this term hallucination so often just to be like, anytime the robot's wrong, it's a hallucination. Yeah. So it's nice to know that there's a difference. But I feel like with question answering, the basis, so like you said, if you put in the conspiratorial website or the conspiratorial PDF, then it's obviously going to give you a different answer than just the factual ones. So is that something that we just, again, have to do our due diligence to make sure that the base material that we're using is correct or, supported by evidence, things like that? Like, how would that work? Or is it literally just up to the person who's plugging in the document?
Yeah, it's kind of up to the person. This is an ongoing problem. Like how much fact checking are companies who create these models responsible for?
That sounds like a big problem.
Yeah, and the fact checking model itself is also it's incredibly expensive. It's difficult to do, and so it's impossible to clean all the training data. You assume that when you do fact checking, you have at least 2 people who are looking at that material and trying to rate whether it's true or not. You also have to assume that they're rational people and that they have access to enough information to give them an informed opinion about whatever they're trying to fact check. Large language models don't have any of that. And there is some curation of training data ongoing, like to remove biased input, to remove factually incorrect information or misinformation, disinformation, whatever. But it's never going to be perfect. These models are going to be subject to bias. They're going to be subject to incorrect information. And in some cases, it's really difficult for even rational people to agree on a ground truth because even if they do have access to the same information, we are more likely to believe information if it confirms our existing bias, and we're less likely to believe it if it doesn't. So even when you have like fact checkers in, there's not going to be 100% agreement. It's really difficult to control for that.
Oh my gosh, you mean you can't get humans to agree 100% of the time on, on factual information?
Yeah, we're going to avoid certain political topics on this, but yeah.
No, but I think, again, we wanted to, the whole purpose of this episode was to talk about how we use things in our daily life to make it better, right? Being able to just plug in a PDF and be like, hey, give me this information is super useful. It saves time, but it's the human element of this technology that we have to make sure as the humans responsible that we are doing our due diligence. Again, I'm a broken record on this, but like making sure that we have enough logic and reason to know that, okay, I understand that the information in this document is factual, is serving the purpose that I need. And not to just throw in random sources and being like, all right, let's hope for the best.
We should almost treat it like the internet. Like people who grew up with the internet generally have an easier time distinguishing between like real and fake content, news content specifically. Older people or people who have not grown up with that technology show lower levels of what we call like internet literacy. So they're more likely to fall for, false information or reshare stuff that is clearly false. And we should treat it almost like that. We should have classes about internet literacy in the same way that we should have classes about generative model literacy or like AI literacy, essentially.
I think AI literacy classes are a great note to end this episode on. Let's get those scheduled and ready to go for everyone. Right. So thank you so much, Brandon, for breaking all of the things down for us today, as usual.
Thanks for having me.
All the things that generative AI is good at that can help us in our daily lives, and also the things that we need to be careful of. So you want to take us out on our tagline?
Generate responsibly.
Thank you for listening to The Generative Edge, a Deloitte Central Europe and AWS production. Your hosts are Brandon Eychaner, Vyasaraj Kulkarni, and Donovan Spronk. Our show is executive produced by Stephanie Cohen, Vanch Luthra, Ian Masters, and the Deloitte studio in Prague. Head writers are Stephanie Cohen and Brandon Eychaner. Our sound and audio engineer is Wojtek Krasa, who also serves as our editor and videographer. Michal Trusina is our graphic designer. Our marketing and social media managed by Stephanie Cohen and the Deloitte studio in Prague. And our theme song was written and produced by Jakub Flaszek. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.